Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee Workshop. Today we're going to build a project that you want to have right near your front door. You'll be able to check yourself out before you head out for the day in a nice beveled glass mirror. There are hooks to hang your hat or your coat. There's a shelf where you can pick up the car keys, and even some cubbies where you can leave the mail that has to go out for the day. Now, it's built out of quarter sawn white oak in the arts and crafts style. We'll build that today right here in the new Yankee Workshop. Now, here's a place I like to check in every once in a while to see what's new. Hey, Sadie. It's J. Austin Antiques, and the proprietor is Jeremy Austin. Hey, Jeremy.
How are you? Good to see you.
Anything new come in recently?
Well, a couple new pieces. Just got a Stickley Brothers rocker here, nice oversized one, all original condition.
Even the original leather, it looks like.
Yeah, sure is.
Now, how much would you get for a piece like this? This is a Stickley original.
Well, something like this would be around $575.
Wow, that's not bad at all.
Yeah, nice tight construction, a little oversized.
Mm-hmm. Anything else new?
Well, I did get this coat rack right here, nice oversized coat rack, real beefy. Hand-forged hooks, probably in bronze or something of that nature. No manufacturer's label or anything like that, but very well built.
Yeah, nice rugged timbers in it.
Yeah.
Well, what caught my eye when I was walking by was this mirror. It looks like some kind of a hall mirror. What can you tell me about that?
Yes, it is. That came out of a North Shore house and was brought down to the shop here. It's all original finish, excellent finish.
How about the mirror?
It appears to be the original mirror and original backing and everything.
Beautiful quarter sawn white oak. What about the hardware? Do you think that's original?
Well, my feeling is that the top hooks are original and that it's possible that these were replaced. Maybe they were pulled off at some point. They are old hooks, but you know, it's very difficult to tell if they are the original ones.
You know, this is not quite what I'm looking for, but it's just about the right size. You mind if I take a few measurements and a couple pictures?
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, thanks. Well, that's good enough, don't you think? This is our version of the hall mirror, and I'm going to put mine right near my back door. It'll be a place that I can drop my keys when I come in the evening, set my gloves in the cubby, and hang up my coat. It's also a place that I can place my mail so I don't forget to take it when I leave in the morning, and I can also check myself out before I head out the door. Now, I incorporated various features from the mirrors we looked at, but basically this is an arts and crafts piece. I built it out of quarter sawn white oak. And here are some of the features. A nice, gentle arch on this top rail, which softens the piece a bit. The stiles stick beyond the rails, both at the top and at the bottom. I've made these through tenons, a very nice feature of arts and crafts pieces, and I'm using a square peg where they're assembled. I've put a chamfer that stops shy of the corners around the mirror. And we decided to use a beveled glass mirror. Now down here I have these corbels, another arts and crafts feature, and I took the time to make a tenon that would stick through the shelf. It should just stick through slightly and be rounded in each direction. These cubbies are made out of 1/2-inch stock, and as I said, this is going to be a great place to stick my gloves or the mail. After the piece is finished, we'll put on the hooks. But if you have a back hallway and you need a place to set your things down, I think you should build one of these. So if you'd like to build your own version, a measure drawing is available with the materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. Here's the stock for our hall mirror. And as I said, it's quarter sawn white oak. What makes it quarter sawn is the direction of the growth rings. They're perpendicular to each face. That makes this material very stable. It won't expand and contract very much in this direction, and it won't cup. It also has a beautiful grain, which is desirable in an arts and crafts piece, as opposed to flat sawn white oak. Now, there's plenty of this stuff around, and it's a lot cheaper than the quarter sawn. And the reason is that they can get a lot more out of a log. If you look at the end of this, you can imagine how they just slice pieces off. They don't waste any of it. And because the grain is almost parallel to the surface, this wood can cup. Flat sawn oak, it's not the right choice for an arts and crafts project. Now, before we start any woodworking, let's talk a little bit about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Now that's nice and square. This is one of my styles. Now I'll just cut it to length. Each style needs 3 mortises. A through mortise for the top rail so the tenon will show through. Down here, a 1-inch deep mortise to pick up the mid rail, and another through mortise for the lower rail. With the mortises laid out on the stiles, I'm now ready to cut them. I'm going to use my dedicated mortiser for that job. Now if I hold the stock up against the chisel, you can see I might be able to make it all the way through that piece. But boy, the mortiser would be working very hard, and I don't want to blow through the far side when the chisel pops through. That would tear the wood away. I want a nice crisp edge. So what I'm going to do is come in about halfway from each side. Now I did have to bring my layout all the way around, so I squared over, put a mark here, and then laid out the mortise on the other edge so that they're perfectly aligned. While I still have my mortiser on the bench, I'm going to mortise out for the decorative peg at the top of the stile. Now the problem is that as the chisel passes through into the mortise I've already made, I could blow out the inside of the mortise. So I'm going to take a piece of scrap stock and slide it in there, and that'll prevent the problem. Looks good. No blowout. Now I'm ready to start forming tenons on the rails, and I'm going to do the long through tenons first. I've set the saw 3/8 of an inch above the table, and I'll make a cut on each edge and each face all the way around. Now I'm working on the top rail, and you'll note that I've only made 3 cuts. I haven't made the cut on this edge, and that's because I have to offset the tenon to account for the material that I'm going to remove when I make that gentle arch on the top of the rail. So I'm going to have to set my blade a bit higher. The stop block stays in the same place, and you just run it through. For the last couple of minutes I've been starting the cheek cuts of each tenon, and for that I'm using my bandsaw and a guide fence. As long as the fence and the blade are square to the table, I'll get a tenon that's equal in thickness. With those 2 cuts, we've completed a tenon. Let's see how it fits in there. It's going to be nice. I've spent a little bit of time fine-tuning the tenons. Now I want to do a dry fit. Make sure everything looks right. Okay, I think that's going to be all right when we put the clamps on it. With the frame clamped together, I now want to make a rabbet along these 4 edges to receive the mirror. And to do that, I'm going to use my router with the rabbeting bit. There's a little ball bearing which will guide against the edge of the wood. Now with hardwoods like this oak, as you bring the router into the work and start to move along, the bit is turning in this direction, and it wants to tear out the wood if you take too much material at once. I have found that if I start the router in and move backwards, holding the router firmly, that I just make a relief cut, maybe 1/8 of an inch deep, then I plunge in, complete the cut, and that'll minimize any tear out. Now with the mirror frame flipped over, I've changed router bits. I've installed a 3/8 inch wide slot cutter, which will also cut 3/8 of an inch deep, and I've set it up so that it'll cut 1/4 inch down from this face to give me a groove all the way around this opening for the solid wood panel. Take another look at our prototype. The next thing I want to do is make this arch on the upper rail. For a template, I have a piece of 1/4-inch plywood, which is a half version of the arch, and I just trace it on each side, and we'll cut it at the bandsaw. Now, the advantage to this machine is that this table is perfectly square to the belt, so I get a nice square edge. If I was sanding this by hand with a belt sander, or even with just a block of wood, I can rock from one side to the other. Now it's time to make a panel that starts at the top of this rail, runs behind the cubbies, up to the bottom of the shelf. There are several alternatives. One would be to use quarter-sawn oak plywood. That would be a special order, it would take a while, and you'd have to buy a whole sheet for a small panel. The second would be to buy a piece of quarter-sawn oak veneer, which you can get, and laminate that onto a piece of, say, birch plywood. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to take a piece of 3/4-inch quarter-sawn oak and simply surface plane it down to the 3/8. Seems like a waste of material, but it's the least expensive alternative. Now this is the end of the through tenon, and the easiest time to ease the corners or round over these edges is now. I like to start with a block plane, just take a little bit off, and then take a block of wood with a piece of fine sandpaper and just sand it until I'm satisfied that I have a nice smooth tenon. Now there's one more thing that I want to do before I glue this piece up. The groove that I made for the panel has round corners on the stiles because I used a router bit. So I have to take a chisel and simply square them up. Well, finally I'm ready for a little assembly. I've applied glue to the inside of each mortise and to all the tenons, and just slipped in the mid rail. Now I want to slip in that panel. And that goes in dry, no glue. Let that move around a little bit. And now the lower rail. And when we get the other side on, we'll clamp it all up. All right, it's looking pretty good. Wipe any glue off the joints and off the ends of these through tenons. We'll let it sit overnight. Tomorrow we'll not only finish the woodworking, but we'll start the finish on this piece. Oh, good morning. Last night the glue set up on our project. I removed it from the clamps this morning, and now I'm sanding the intersections of the joints smooth. No matter how careful I am making the mortises and the tenons, there's always just a little difference between the pieces, and I want them to be smooth. I start out with 120 grit, move to 150, then to 220. Well, now's the time to route the chamfer detail around the inside edge of the frame where it meets the mirror. I have a layout mark 1 inch from each corner, and I'm using a chamfering bit. The router leaves a curve at the end of these chamfers. I want it to be nice and crisp, so I just use a sharp chisel to true it up. Now I want to chamfer the outside edge of the frame all the way around, as well as the top and bottom of the stiles. I'm still using the chamfering bit, I've just exposed less of the cutter. Now here's a section of the chamfer that I couldn't do with the router. I'll do it by hand. Here I have a piece of square stock, and I've just rounded over the end of it. It's going to be for this square peg. I want to round the end now because I wouldn't be able to tool it once it's in place. Now that it's rounded, I can cut it to length. And before I can drive it into that hole, I want to knock the corner off a bit where the cut was just made, so it'll be easier to get it started. Now a little glue. And let's see if we can get it in there. Okay, clean that up a little bit. It adds a nice detail to the piece. Now, one more thing that I have to do to this frame on the back side is to square up the rabbet for the mirror. The router leaves a rounded corner. Now's the time to get rid of that. Well, let's take another look at our prototype. The next thing I want to work on is this shelf and cubby system. The first pieces I want to make are these corbels that go on each end. There's a tenon that sticks through the shelf that's part of that corbel. I want to make that first. Here's a blank for one of those corbels, all laid out. The first thing I want to do is make these two cuts along the top to start forming this tenon. I've set up a stop block that controls the length of the tenon, and we'll guide it through with the miter gauge. Okay, now that tenon is offset a bit, so I've lowered the blade to make the second cut. Now I'm going to make the side cuts on that tenon. And I want to use a guide fence so that that cut is perfectly straight and the tenon is uniform. All right, after moving my fence over a bit, I'm ready to cut the other side. Now with the fence removed, we can freehand the curve on this piece. Here's the shelf for our hall mirror, and I've laid out for a square mortise, which is necessary to receive the tenon from the corbel that I just made. Now to start forming that mortise, I've set up my drill press with a 7/8 inch diameter Forstner bit, and I'm going to drill from each side. Now using this corner chisel as well as a regular chisel, I'll square up the hole. All right, that completes the through mortise. Now I'm going to take the corbel, place it in, draw a line around the tenon so that when I round over the top, I won't round it too much. Now's the time to chamfer the front edge and the ends, both top and bottom, of the shelf. All right, now it's time to glue the corbels to the shelf. I've put glue in the mortise and on the tenon. Set it in place, clamp it, and let it sit for a bit. Now it's just a matter of making a series of stop dados that will form those little cubbies. And I like using my router with the clear base. That way I can see exactly where I have to stop. Now if I slide this bottom shelf into the stop dado, you can see where it ends up. Now I didn't want to run the dado all the way through, otherwise it would show. That's why I stopped it. But now to conceal it, I'm going to make a notch in the shelf. It'll be a 1/4 inch deep and a 1/2 inch long, and then you won't see the groove. Well, finally we're ready for a little assembly. Some glue in the stop dado. I'll set the piece in and then pin it with a couple brads. And now I'm going to drill a series of holes in the frame for screws that I'll use to attach the shelf. All right, well, a little more sanding, and this piece will be ready for the finishing room. Now, one of the stains that I'm going to be using when I finish this project is an alcohol-based stain. An alcohol-based stain can sometimes raise the grain of the wood. Once the grain is raised, it's almost impossible to get rid of it. So what I'm going to do is pre-raise the grain by spraying on some water and wiping it in, not too much, just enough to wet the surface. This will raise the grain. After it dries, I'll take some sandpaper and just go over it very lightly. I don't want to sand it too much. Then it'll be ready for stain. Now, I want to use distilled water because water out of the tap often has minerals in it which will stain woods like oak. It'll leave little black specks. Now we let it dry and lightly sanded it, and now I'm just using a tack cloth to remove any dust. The first stain is going to be the alcohol-based stain, which is primarily alcohol with dye powder mixed in it. This is a combination of red mahogany, brown mahogany, and yellow. I'm going to spray it on and then just take a rag and make it nice and even. And once that dries, we'll go to the next step. The second step in our arts and crafts finish is to apply a oil-based stain over that alcohol stain. And the color here is dark walnut. Just brush on a fairly even coat. And after it sets for 5 to 15 minutes, I'll wipe off any excess. Now when you wipe off the excess, I'm really just trying to blend it and make sure it's nice and even. Darkens the wood a bit, starts to bring out the features. Now once this is dry, we'll apply several coats of a satin polyurethane for the final protective coat. And there it is in all its arts and crafts glory, with the beveled glass mirror installed and some nice period hardware. Now I have a place to check myself out before I head out the door. This is going to fit nicely in the hallway.
If you've enjoyed this new Yankee project, you may want to try some of the others. There are projects meant for the workshop, the garden, the kitchen, and many more. So whether you're a fan of shaker style, or colonial, arts and crafts, or Chippendale, there may be a Norm project you'd like to build. Whether it's a clock or a gazebo, a picnic bench or a Windsor chair, a child's toy or a sailboat, visit the New Yankee website at www.newyankee.com for a complete listing.